Critical mistake number one is they think they can wait. I was basically a workaholic. I had 2 8-figure exits in my 20s, so I had this incredible start. I was just working myself to death.
I can't work less. Like, if I work less, all these things won't happen.
If you want to be a successful entrepreneur by any of the definitions that we talked about, like ultimately, you have to have a business that is not.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. Most founders build businesses to grow. Some build them to scale. Very few build to sell, and even fewer build to never need to sell. Today's guest has lived every side of that equation. He started, scaled, and exited 6 different companies across tech, sports, and media. From building companies that sold to NBC Sports to sitting on boards of multi-million-dollar public company, he's seen what to separate good business from an acquirable one actually means. But what makes his perspective super different is he believes most founders don't fail because they lack ambition. They fail because they build businesses without accountability or optionality. Today, through ExitDNA in a light boardroom, he helps founders build companies that don't depend on them, critical, operate at buyer level standards, and creates leverage long before an exit. This conversation is about building a business so strong, you never even have to sell it. Lackey, welcome to Entrepreneurial Excellence.
Thank you for having me, Adam. Excited to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So I start every conversation with the same question. How do you define entrepreneurial excellence? Like, what does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, one of the things I always look back and think being an entrepreneur is probably one of the best decisions of my life, definitely in the top 5 decisions. And so just becoming an entrepreneur is life-changing in a lot of ways. Excellence to me is kind of a combination of performance, so actually performing well as an entrepreneur, but also the, taking advantage of what it allows, which to me means optimizing for time. Some of the best things that have happened to me over the past 30 years really relate to I could work when I want, how I want, with who I want, and optimizing for time, particularly with family, has made one of the biggest differences in my life. And so I think, entrepreneurial excellence is kind of at that intersection of performance and intentionality, perhaps.
So let's dig into a bunch of those things, right? So when you say like performance, in a sense, what does that actually mean? Like, a lot of entrepreneurs, right, might say like, I perform at a high level. And in some ways you'd say, I hope if you decide to become an entrepreneur, you actually really believe you can perform at a high level. But what does that truly mean, right? You've seen pretty bad entrepreneurs probably, and a lot of great ones too.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the definition of performance and success and all those things are so individual, and that's really what it should be. So for me, it's like, if your goal as an entrepreneur is to leave a 9-to-5 job and be able to support yourself, and you do that, you're performing in a great way. If your, goals are to make $1 million a year and you pull it off, like, that's another level of performance. So performance is relative, but the key thing for me is always, are you performing to your expectation and your potential? And those things are, you can sort of self-diagnose and hold yourself accountable. But to me, it's really been being able to live the life I've wanted to live by my rules, by my definitions. And when I look at other people, even though their definition may be different, that's when I'm like, yeah, you're succeeding as an entrepreneur. You're doing what you needed and wanted to do.
I actually really like that definition. I think too many founders and entrepreneurs measure themselves against like Elon Musk, and they're like, well, I haven't succeeded because I'm not the world's richest man. And look, don't get me wrong. I think probably all of us as entrepreneurs have some sort of ego when we get started and think maybe I can be the next Elon Musk. And then you get to a point in your career where you're like, well, I'm probably not going to be the next Elon Musk. And that's like, that's not, I've still done pretty well. And so let's talk through the intentionality piece then as well. So performing, and then intentionality is like, to your point, sort of choosing who you're with, and maybe contrast that with the alternative, which presumably is working for someone else and not having that level of control.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about Elon Musk. I mean, there are several entrepreneurs, and of course I won't name them by name because some of them are actually friends and people I like and respect. But sometimes I see entrepreneurs and they will state a goal. I'm going to be worth $100 million. I'm going to be a billionaire. I'm going to build a, $100 million company. And in a lot of cases, I look at them and say, that you probably will. I wouldn't do any of the things that are required to become a billionaire. Like, it's not interesting at all to me. Now, if someone handed me $1 billion, amazing. But um,
Let me know when that starts happening. Someone's handing out the bags of billions,
yeah,
and I'll line up with you.
exactly. Because what that basically means is, to me, is there's a level of commitment, but also sacrifice and trade off to achieve a financial wealth that I'm just not interested in. I would so much rather my calendar look like it does by design, which is maybe 2 things a day on my calendar. I took a, went to the gym this morning. I took a walk with my wife. I will probably eat lunch with my wife. I mean, to me, that's worth more than the incremental, money I could make by grinding all day. And I made that decision a long time ago when my first daughter was born. I was basically a workaholic. I had 2 8-figure exits in my 20s, so I had this incredible start, but I also was like falling asleep on the floor in the office. I was just working myself to death. And I had already made a lot of money, but that's the only gear I had, was like full throttle work. And when my daughter was born, I was like, that's just not the life I want at all. I want to be home for dinner. I want to coach her soccer team. I want to make her pancakes. I want to be at the school plays. And none of that fit the life I was living at all. Like, I just literally worked, I mean, 7 days a week. And I, suddenly had to say, that's not the goal anymore. Now the goal is optimizing for time, particularly with my daughter who was born. And then I had another daughter. And that decision changed the way I worked, changed the way I've built companies, changed the way I've optimized time. I mean, everything really was a fundamental shift in August of 2000 when she was born. And the way I love to tell the story, because it's still so cool to me, is like, that little girl, August of 2019, literally 19 years, almost to the day later, I dropped her off for her freshman year at NYU. And I was able to look at her and say, I was pretty much there for everything. Like, I wasn't a perfect dad. I did dumb stuff, made dumb decisions, but I did everything. I carved all the pumpkins and was at every Donuts for Dads. But I also built and sold 4 more companies over those 19 years. Like, it wasn't a big enough trade-off that it wasn't more than worth it. Could I have made an incremental, 7 figures, 8 figures, whatever? Maybe. I would have never made that trade. So for me, that's how I kind of think about intentionality, and I lived it for a long time.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, I love that definition as someone who is a workaholic myself, but also has 2 young kids. I think about that sort of trade-off a lot. I mean, and for myself, actually, what I've done as an entrepreneur is I basically just don't travel. So I work from home. I don't travel. So I'm there for almost all the things. Now, I still work way too hard. So I definitely want to talk through like how I can get myself out of that. I actually have an executive coach to help me do that. And I've still completely failed at that. But like, so walk through that. Like, let's talk through like, what does it take to go from that founder who was falling asleep in the office to one who has now 2 hours or 2 things on your calendar sort of every day, and can have all the time in the world for your wife and your kids and everything else. And like, how did you make that switch? And then also like, how did you think through like, what is the right amount of effort? So maybe there's sort of 2 different questions, but like, what is the right amount of effort, right? Because for a lot of founders, it's like, I can't work less. Like, if I work less, all these things won't happen. And if these things don't happen, my company might fail.
Right.
And so it's really difficult to get yourself out of that right now. And that's, I mean, I can use my own personal example from this right now because it's really deep in it. But like, how do you get yourself out of those situations in general, or know what the right amount of stepping back is and still achieving an exit that is worthwhile, maybe just slightly less than what it would have been?
Yeah, no, it's a key question. And I know there are different types of entrepreneurs, different types of companies, of course. And to some degree, like a complete solopreneur, which is, kind of where I am now for the most part. But for a lot of my entrepreneurial journey, I had, employees and, co-founders, and I wasn't completely by myself. But I'll tell you specifically, when I made that decision in August of 2000, there was like this kind of funny, almost like, legendary, although that sounds too big. It wasn't legendary. But right after she was born, before she would have even known whether I was there or not, I had made the commitment, right? I just said, I'm going to be home for dinner at 5 o'clock.
What was it switch? What, like, just sorry to interrupt you. Like, what was the switch that made you make that decision? Like, I feel like it's really hard for people who have like that gear, and clearly you've had that gear to like push really hard probably for a lot of your life.
Yeah.
What was that gear that said, wow, there's this new tiny little child and I'm going to slow things down. Like that's not something that most people can do easily.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy. I mean, that's probably a key part of the, what I will say. But my own, I'm an only child. I grew up with great parents who, my father in particular, worked incredibly hard. He started as a third shift engineer. Didn't go to college and just worked. So I learned and watched what a work ethic looks like.
Oh,
I
yeah,
learned it
same.
from my dad, and I respected it a lot, and I wanted to be a hardworking person. And he was incredibly he was a he was and is a great father. So like that's a key caveat. However, like I was playing soccer from a young age all the way, through, and sometimes he couldn't, come to a game, or he couldn't be home for dinner because he was working and he had to do certain things for the family. And I kind of grew up with this working mentality, but I also, he would often say, don't do things that trap you, right? And that meant money, time, and so it was always in the back of my mind. And when I was about to have our first daughter, I just thought, I want to be like my dad was in a lot of ways, because again, he was a great dad. But I also wanted to be present, and I know he couldn't. And in my mind, I was not willing to accept the trade-off that everybody around me was telling me. They're like, "You're an entrepreneur, you're a workaholic, like, you can't be home for 5 o'clock at dinner, that's ridiculous." And the way I kinda translated that was 2 things. One is I just made the decision. I had no idea how it was gonna work, if it was gonna fail miserably, but I was like, "I'm committed," and so I made this commitment to my little girl. That was a big part of it for me. And what happened, and that was the brief story I was gonna say, is like literally right after she came home from the hospital, I had set an alarm at the office at 4:45, so I would like know to like leave and go home. And I was running a meeting. I was standing at the dry erase board, talking to my leadership team, and the alarm went off. And I literally dropped the dry erase pen in the little tray and turned around and walked out of the office. And I honestly think like everybody in the room was probably laughing, like, haha, Mac's going to walk right back in. But I drove home and I did it again the next day. And what happened that was crazy, and I would have never expected it, and I would have never understood the importance of it. But after a few days, it went from what the heck is Mac doing to Mac is going to leave at 4:45. So when Mac leaves, who's going to run the meeting? Who's going to take the customer call because Mac isn't going to be here? If Mac's here, of course he's going to run the meeting. Of course he's going to take the call with the important customer. And so all of a sudden, I watched my entire organization shift to Mac isn't going to do it. So who should, who can, who will? And it was like my team, I had been holding them back, not even realizing it, because if Mac's there, Mac's going to do it. And so I watched good people in my organization that, I used to always say, you throw them in the deep end of the pool and they sink or swim. And like a lot of people like immediately rose to the occasion into a higher level of performance. There are always a few people that like, they just don't. And that's okay too, right? You realize quicker that those people aren't the right ones for the organization. So for me, I learned by like a forcing function that I thought might fail, that I actually had a better approach when I was getting out of everyone's way. And I stayed into the few things that I did incredibly well and, took ownership of those things, and everything else I was like, hey, somebody else should own this. I'm leaving. Who's better. And so I watched that forcing function actually make us a better business. And then after that, I did it in every company, even to the point my last company before I sold it. I mean, I was the largest shareholder. I was all these things, but like I didn't have an office. People didn't know if I was in the country or not. Like I just came in and out of the office when it made sense. The business had to run the same, whether I was there or not. And that was an evolutionary process that all started with me just deciding to kind of drop the marker and walk out.
And is that so? I mean, is that then the secret to getting yourself out of this? Is sort of like delegation by forcing function in a sense? Is sort of saying like, hey, like I'm not here to cover for you, because I think a lot of people feel like the founder, and this is mostly true. Founders in many cases will work harder than anyone else, and because they have more context as well, they are probably in the moment better than anyone else at it. The problem, of course, they're also not as focused because you're spread incredibly thin. I mean, this is once again like our head of go to market, recently parted ways with him, and I'm sort of stepping in to figure out what's going on. I want my team to step in and do these things, and they sort of haven't. And this is a bit of a frustration that I have right now. But but I'm like, guys, like you own different parts of like the go-to-market function. You are better at this than I am. I don't have the time to focus on it. So like, please make some decisions.
Yep.
And it's hopefully forcing them to do that. But like, how do founders get good at this? Because it's still, I think, really difficult for someone to step back and just say, yeah, like, I'm not going to do it. And then what, they either just let it, but what happens if they start failing? Like, what if that function just sinks?
Yeah. So that you're exactly right. I mean, I think number one, I am actually a pretty big believer in, a couple things. One is forcing functions. A forcing function like that, like you make a decision, put it on the calendar, and like it's black and white, like the next day it changes. And a forcing function will uncover very quickly, often, performance, good and bad. And so there will be individuals and people that when there's a forcing function like that, that like take the reins, make decisions, step up, perform at a higher level. They're aligned, they're doing great. And there'll be other people that like, freeze like a deer in the headlights or whatever, right? They just are like, I don't know what to do. Where's Adam? How do I make a decision? And those people, you need to either get them aligned and improved quickly, or they're not the right people because, that's what performance culture should look like is great people perform, people that aren't great very quickly, even self-discover that like, they're not going to do well in this environment. And so those forcing functions and sometimes constraints, I always tell people now, like, if that's way too extreme, like, hey, hit a switch and just disappear tomorrow. Some people can't or won't do that. Then just start on, Friday and make it Friday at noon. The calendar's blocked from noon on. You're not available. You're not reachable. People learn that. And then start moving it to 11 and then make it 9 a.m. Friday and then make it Thursday afternoon. And you just start like putting constraints around time if you can't do a hard black and white reset. And it works. It's just slower.
Yeah. And then, I mean, so then another question might be is, okay, well, if you're sort of stepping back in all these different ways, you are, as a founder, sort of a drag on the financial outcome. So what I mean by this, like to put it in a different way, right? And we talk about certainly a lot about selling a company too. If you're a founder, you're the largest shareholder, you're taking salary, all these things, and yet you're like, you're making a few major critical big decisions, but you're not working really hard day to day sort of thing. It's like, well, all right, we're paying Mac all this money. And then everyone else is getting all this work done. Who's actually doing the real day-to-day work? How does that work for the business? So I'll give you maybe a concrete example. I've been doing a lot of the sales for my company for a long time. We've had some salespeople that haven't worked out, so I'll jump back in. I'm currently doing a lot of them again because I don't take commission. Arguably, like that's like makes our numbers look really good for the company, right? How does that like trade-off work though? When I start stepping back, like, hey, look, I'm not doing this anymore. We have other people who are going to do this role. They'll probably do it better. Like I hope they will be way better and we'll actually get better sales. How does that trade-off work though? Because I'm working hard. I'm sort of the highest paid employee, but I'm also the hardest working one and probably the best producer. And if I step back and keep my salary, but stop producing a lot less, what does that mean for the overall financials of the business?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of hats that most founders wear. Sometimes it's founder, largest shareholder, owner, and CEO or key employee or VP of sales or whatever the is. And over time, those roles might in fact shift and you basically move from VP of sales or head of sales or, the number one producer to your ownership role. And then your compensation probably shouldn't be salary. It should be distributions or profits. Right. And the organization, and I used to always say, I mean, not in an aggressive way at all. Like people that are like getting frustrated that the founder or owner after a number of years who's performed really well is like sitting back or traveling and enjoying the fruits of his labor, they should leave and start their own company.
Yeah. I don't think anyone feels that way at my company Chore right now, but I could see it someday occurring where that's the case. And I'm like, I know people get annoyed, like, well, that guy's making all this money. He's not doing any hard work. And it's like, okay, did you give the company a loan to get started and make payroll?
Exactly.
Did you work 6 to 7 days a week nonstop for the first 3.5, 4 years to get it going and not getting paid a lot? Like, people forget all that. And my assumption, what I've seen is most people don't end up leaving. Yeah. They don't end up building anything because it's pretty hard.
Yeah. And I think the transparency, I had this conversation with an entrepreneur that I was coaching just the other day. And I said, I'm a pretty big believer in trying to let the numbers be transparent, let people understand what's going on in a business. It's good for their career, the financial education, the literacy that comes along with understanding a P&L, even if they're not responsible for it. But I've definitely had conversations with leaders in my teams or employees that'll say, I really feel like I need more equity and ownership and upside. And I'm like, all right, as long as there's two sides of that equation, there's risk and reward. So like last year I had to put $1 million into the business to keep it afloat. Like, as long as you're willing to put your 100 grand in every time I put my 900 in, like, okay, let's talk about it, and people, no, I don't want to have to write a check. Okay, then that's equity.
Right.
That's ownership, and it's great when it's doing really well and you're benefiting from the profits. But like you said, were you the one putting up the loans or keeping the business alive? And I've been in all those positions over the years. And sometimes people don't understand it, but those are usually not the right people.
Right. No, and I think that's exactly it. And then, so then how do you find, let's say people in the team who aren't performing, right? Who don't step up to this point when you step back, how fast do you find a new replacement for them? How do you go about that sort of transition? Cause it can be kind of rocky. You're like, okay, like clearly this person maybe isn't stepping up. I need to bring someone else new in, but like there's this weird transition period. How do you sort of deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, there's companies, individuals, they kind of like do this over time. They're in alignment, things are great, and then for whatever reason, maybe it's performance, maybe it's an expectation, maybe it's, I don't know, people are upset about something. They kind of move out of alignment. Part of the job of a leader is to try to keep people as aligned as possible. And maybe the first time that it happens, it's not really a performance thing. You just need to talk about expectations or compensation or what, this role really looks like in your eyes. And so I like to give people an opportunity to like bring it back into alignment. But the minute that someone's out, I'm thinking they may not make it back into alignment. If that's true, I need to be prepared to make the tougher call, let them go, assume they'll leave, whatever the case may be, and replace them. And how do we replace them? Internally, can someone take on their role? Can we, fraction it off, or do we need to hire someone? And I would never let that surprise me or the employee. Like, the minute that sort of trigger happens, I'm like, now we need to be planning on what may happen. Path A, path B. And so I try to mitigate risk. Sometimes you're, caught off guard. People just leave. That happens. You have to fire someone because of something even more extreme. And that makes it a little bit more of a scramble, or you might have to take something on as a founder for a period of time.
Right. So it sounds like you try to be really transparent, which I think is the right way to do it. And so you do have the conversation with that person, say, hey, look, this right now, I don't feel like you're stepping up. If you don't step up kind of soon, and here's at a high level what that sort of looks like,
Yep.
we're going to start looking for someone else for this role. And that person either steps back and continues to underperform, I guess, or they step up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, yes, I'm a big believer in transparency, and I'm also a big believer in, I try to be a good person. So if I feel like I'll tell you, even recently I had a long time executive assistant who was wonderful for a long time. And I always give people the benefit of the doubt. And there was a kind of a performance dip not too long ago. And I brought it to her attention and just said, hey, I don't know what's going on. And maybe it's your personal life. Maybe it's something else. You don't even have to tell me. It's technically none of my business, and I don't want to pry, but I'm noticing this performance dip. And, performance to me is everything. Like, I want you to be happy and fulfilled, but I also need the performance. And it led to almost an immediate conversation within 48 hours of where she kind of wanted to head in her life and career, which was a totally different direction, which I was very supportive of. Like, hey, I want you to be happy. But because I saw the performance dip and I brought it to her attention, it forced the issue, which may have taken another month before she, either had the courage or whatever it was to say, hey, Mac, I really want to go do something totally different in my life. It's like, so I believe you elevate those things. Good people will say, you're right, my performance has slipped. I'll get it back on track. Maybe you have to have a discussion around, if like, I learned this from my dad a long time ago too. This always made sense to me. When you sit down with someone about their performance that's not performing well, you ask them how they think they are performing. There's two answers. They either say, I think I'm performing incredibly well, at which point you can say, I disagree, and here's why. Let's talk about the gap. Or they will admit and they'll agree, like, yeah, I'm actually not performing well. Okay, good. We're on the same page. How are we going to get you back on track? So asking that simple question, if you have an employee that understands their performance or not. And then you can discuss what alignment looks like, what expectations are. And then after a short period of time, they're either back or they're not.
Yeah, no, I mean it's really good advice for everybody to think through that. And I appreciate that you addressed it pretty quickly. I think one of the mistakes that I made using sort of how to go to market. Someone I worked with for a really long time. We do monthly performance check-ins with everyone on our team. So like it's very clear if things are not performing well every single month. And we have a rule that if it's sort of like I think 2 months in a row where you're sort of under target, basically that's sort of a serious conversation. Like let's get this figured out. And I let this go on a lot longer than that, and that was a failure of mine because in the end you start uncovering things like, oh wow, like this person who I really liked and respected, there turns out there's a lot of things that were actually wrong and that were not going well that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And had we had a much more serious conversation before then, it might have uncovered stuff. And I sort of failed as a founder on that front.
Yeah. I heard a mentor of mine, many, many years ago used to always say, you hire slow and fire fast, be very, very thoughtful in hiring and then very quick when there's not alignment. Your gut, your heart, your head probably all know it. Like, don't belabor it. Like, you need to move on. And it's usually best for the employee or the person that's the team member that's getting, quote, terminated. They're going to find a better aligned position, a better fit for their skills. It's usually better for everybody.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So I want to go back to like your early days of starting as being an entrepreneur. Like what got you to the place where you were the sort of person who has had all these multiple exits and really successful outcomes, especially when you were young, but it just in general, like, it sounds like you had a very nice, good childhood. Like what drove you to be this person? And like, what made you, most entrepreneurs never get 8-figure exits and multiple ones. What drove you? Like, why do you think you're different there?
So I think of my life, in my early life, at least, in two big buckets. The first part of my life was really, really all about soccer. It was kind of my passion. I started playing.
It still is. Yeah, you didn't even mention, you're also a team owner of a football club in Spain. So like, still is a clear big part of your life.
Yeah, it's been a life passion, but I was a very driven, motivated soccer player. Like that, all of my goals and dreams were soccer related. I want to play at this level. I want to achieve these things. Like that's just how I kind of looked at life. And, thankfully, I achieved a lot of the things I wanted. I went to, I went to university in my mind, basically to play soccer. I mean, of course, I got a degree at the end of that process, but like it was all about playing soccer. It was not about, so all of a sudden, post my playing career, I played, briefly after college, and I was like, man, this is just coming to an end. There's no path for me. What am I going to do? And I was a psychology major. I had never taken a business class. I had never taken a computer science class. I had never taken an engineering class. I literally was like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. So I joined I met someone on the soccer field, a friend who was working for a startup in the like tech education space. I joined as their lowest level employee, supposedly in the marketing department, but it was like 5 people. So everybody did everything. Like every day you did something different. And I really fell in love with the energy of a startup almost immediately. And I think I like the intellectual challenge of literally showing up, not knowing, some days I was cold calling, some days I was learning to write code, then I was taking out the trash or dealing with, problems. And I just fell in love with that. But I really was only there for a day or two, ironically, before I started feeling like the president of the company, like he didn't want to hear my ideas. He didn't have any interest in what I was thinking. Even, I'm a young, arrogant kid. I probably didn't have that much to offer. But in my mind, I didn't like the fact that he wasn't even including me, didn't ask me anything. So I, very quickly decided I want to start my own company. It took about 6 months of working there. It was my only real job before I started my first company. I convinced an engineer that worked with me to leave, resign, and we started our first internet company. And, timing is literally everything. I mean, I started an internet company right after Netscape launched the web browser in first quarter 95. So in hindsight, that looks, I mean, it was lucky, brilliant, not because of intelligence, brilliant timing.
You make your own luck on the timing though part, right? You've had a few of those, so you make your own.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I mean, it's funny now because it's hard to even like take yourself there, even though I was literally living it, in the mid 90s. 95, 96, like people thought the internet was a fad. Nobody trusted, nobody would put a credit card on the internet. No companies really thought they would ever do anything other than have a brochure to talk about their company. Like that was the internet, you know? And so we were so convicted that it was going to change everything, but we were 20, 24, 25-year-old kids sitting in boardrooms with, Fortune 500 CEOs telling them, and they were like, these dumb kids. And so, in hindsight, yeah, we were lucky where timing was great. We sold that first business into a roll up. It went public. And then I was hooked. I was like, this is, I worked really hard. I had really smart people around me that I, should get most of the credit. But at the same time, going from literally no money, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, working on my table that was secondhand. My wife and I were married in 96. And I was working in this 1-bedroom apartment, and literally within 3 years of starting the company, we sold it and I checked off every like financial goal of my life. I mean, I wasn't even dreaming that big because I didn't grow up with anything.
Right.
So
What did you know? What?
yeah,
But so, why do you think? Like, even so, like, why do you think you, as like soccer playing kid in like college, what made you different? Right, most of your friends on that soccer team didn't go do what you did.
yeah.
Like, why are you different?
I don't really know. I mean, I think the things that I like am drawn to, like I just have always been willing to take a lot of risk. Now I could argue to the ends of the earth, like how risky is stuff. Like I always looked at like working at a bank. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a banking town. All my smart friends work at the banks. But to me, it was kind of like, yeah, one, that looks like it's going to suck. I don't want to do that. And number two, you can just get fired. Like somebody can just not like you, or the whole division gets laid off. And I always thought that was the risky thing. I would rather control my destiny. And so I always viewed risk, I think, differently than most of my friends and peers. And I was willing to, like in soccer, the same thing. Like I would, they used to say Jordan would take the last three because he wanted the glory, but also would be okay if like he missed it. He would take the blame. Like I've always felt like that too. Give me the last shot at the buzzer. Let me take the penalty kick. I'll take the glory, but I'll also be like, yeah, guys, I blew it. I missed the shot. The game was on me. And and that mentality, I think, of whatever you want to call it, taking risk and being comfortable, betting on yourself. I don't know. I had it. Maybe my wife would say my parents made me really confident. They used to always say like, yeah, you can figure it out. Try it. Worst case is it fails, you'll be okay. I kind of had that stuff in my brain and it worked out. I mean, I guess if the first company would have been a miserable failure, maybe it would have changed the trajectory, but it validated that. And so then I was like, I want to do it again. I love it. I'm energized by it. So that started kind of the path.
And that's just what you kept doing. Then is like you just kept finding these companies. What would you say was sort of extra hard work on your part? Was it a certain level of drive? In other words, like a lot of people probably think, well, Mac has had this success because he is just smarter than everyone else, but it doesn't also sound like it's necessarily your willingness to work hard. Maybe it was in the early days, like what, but what your buddies from the soccer team were lazing around having beers, and you're like passed out on your desk because you're working so hard. Like, okay, fine, you got to take the reins of your own career and make some different decisions and not take the safe path. But what else do you think? There's other pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, if there are two or three very consistent, repeatable things that have been a big part of quote, success that I've had. Number one, risk has been a part of that, but the big ones I think are I would see trends and opportunities and say that I'm going to go solve that. Like there's a problem that needs fixed. There's an opportunity that people are moving slow on and debating and him and hawing, I'm just going to go, And so like the speed of like, I see an opportunity, I'm all in. Even to like my wife's early, chagrin, anytime I'd sell a company or I'd be in some kind of safe place of like, I have a salary or maybe I even have benefits, I would immediately resign to start something else. It would be like, I don't like this spot. It feels like cruise control. I don't like it. So I think seeing opportunities and being willing to act on them when it's not really clear what it's going to play out like. I mean, again, the internet was a really big early example of that. I mean, I bought Bitcoin at $200 a coin. I mean, I know there are people that bought it at $1, but most of my friends or people I knew were like Bitcoin's a joke. Like, why would you buy
Oh,
Bitcoin?
yeah. I remember having the same discussions with people.
Yeah, it's like, why would you do that? Just seems stupid, you know? And to me, it's like risk reward. Like, I didn't spend a ton of money, but I bought Bitcoin. That was a great decision, right? And so, but the other one, 100% is people surrounding myself. Like every business I've had, I look at what do I think? Because I don't know. What do I think the critical success factors are going to be? If it's developing a product, I need a brilliant engineer. If it's doing something in sports media, I need a sports guy. If I, and I have surrounded myself with people that I think are world class and be willing to give them total control, discretion over the things that I think they're uniquely positioned to do, because most businesses come down to people. And whether it's full time employees, co-founders, advisors, mentors, like I look back over 30 plus years now and say it's always been people. I've surrounded myself by a lot of smart people.
So given that, then the obvious next question is, how do you identify those people, right? Like, we all should surround ourselves with smart people. Many of us failed to do that.
Yeah. On one side of the equation, I think every person, but for sure every entrepreneur should have mentors and advisors. And the mentors and advisors, I think the mistake so many people make is looking at things like money, right? And you're like, hey, Adam has a lot of money. Like, I bet he could help me. Like, I looked at people that were living the kind of life I wanted to live. And it was like, how do I do that? Like, that's who I want my mentor to be. Like, my longest kind of time mentor for me, it was really about, he was successful, like for sure. He financially was very successful. I like the way he lived his life, like his morals and ethics and family and helping people. Like, it's like, man, if I could grow up and be like him, I would have a great life. I'd be very happy. And so he was one of the first people. I was like, I just want to learn from him, emulate what he's doing. And so I feel like most people don't have mentors and an advisory board around their company. I rarely have had a company that didn't have amazing advisors around it for everything I thought was important. I wanted an advisor. Like if I started an apparel company, for example, which was a total deviation of what I had done before. I was like, I need people that understand consumer marketing that I don't. I need people that understand, wholesale business. I don't. And so I would find what I considered a world-class person for each one of those critical success factors, and that would be my advisory board. And I hardly ever run across entrepreneurs that do that.
Well, first of all, how do you find those people? And then let's talk about why entrepreneurs don't do it. But like, how do you end up identifying those sorts of people as if you don't know that industry, right? If you don't know consumer marketing, let's say, how do you even know what the great person looks like? Because you're going to talk to someone who might be a complete BSer.
I think it's difficult in some ways, particularly in some of those areas like, sales. Like anybody that you want to help you with sales, like they're a good salesperson, they can sell themselves, right? So that's hard to identify. But if you look at, again, I try to pierce through and look at how people live their lives, companies they've built, what they've done, talk to third parties to get perspective. Like a lot of people will say, hey, I was part of the Uber team and I was employee 40 or 50. And like, that's awesome. And then you talk to a few other people in your network and you're like, yeah, that guy was a bad guy, or he wasn't really, he didn't even have it. He just got lucky. He was sitting there. So I think there is still something I'm actually actively working on right now, this advisory idea, that because I think it's difficult for people to find these advisors, but it's such a priority that I think it should be a key part of the formula. So I really just prioritized it. I was like, I'm going to find someone. I'm going to ask my network, who do they know? Who do they like? Who have they worked with in the past that did that role? And people that I've already built a trusted relationship with are the best ones to help me identify similar people, right? So I did a lot of that, and I made some mistakes. Of course, I had, not many mentors because those were very carefully chosen, but I had advisors that, ultimately I was like, they're smart, but they're huge egos. I don't really want to spend time with them. I mean, I've made mistakes, of course, but more often than not, advisors have been a huge part of what really helped us make big, important decisions and validate something I was thinking or prove me wrong, which I'm a big believer in. Like, hey, I'm loosely held conviction, right? I have an idea, but if someone smarter than me has a better thought, let's do it. So
And are you giving these advisors and like, do you give them equity, cash? How do you usually set that up?
yeah, most of my companies, particularly early on, early part of my career, I mean, I didn't really have the ability because I was always in kind of a startup, a resource constrained startup. It's like paying someone cash was not going to happen. And so we usually would come up with stock options or equity or something that was meaningful to them. I mean, what's kind of cool about having a really meaningful conversation with an individual is, for example, I'll make this up, but like if you looked at me and were like, Max seems very passionate, knowledgeable, and connected in the soccer world, and I have a kid that's trying to make it to the next level in soccer, like that's more important to me than money. So I want Mac to help me personally in that way, and I'm going to help Mac with what he cares about. And like
Yeah.
that's a great relationship. It's very clear, mutually beneficial expectations. So sometime, I mean, I would say the general standard was some kind of expectation agreement in terms of frequency of communication. I had advisors that I talked to every week, and then I had others that it were like as needed, if needed. And those, I would have, they'd get a little bit of equity or something that they were willing to be, take a call if I needed it. And then other advisors that I talked to every week that were almost like part of my leadership team. I just didn't have the ability to hire them full time or they didn't, they had another job. So I looked at each one individually.
And why do you think then most founders don't get a good like advisory board and then also mentors as well? Like, and to be clear, like it's something I think I failed at as a founder,
Yeah.
and way too many times in my career on both fronts, actually.
I think there's a variety of reasons. I mean, one obvious is ego. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs have big egos and say like and there's also something that feels good about like I'm going to figure stuff out. Like that's a great mentality if you don't know answers. But I was always almost like lazy about it. Like, why am I going to learn this the hard way? I'm going to find someone that already knows the answers. And just
Yeah.
like I'm going to learn from them anyway, but I'm not going to make the mistakes. And and I do think like what's the word? Being self-aware, self-critical, like looking in the mirror, I can usually say there are a few things that I would legitimately put myself up against anybody. Like, hey, I'm good at this, right? There are a few things, not many, but there's a few. And I never thought I was the smartest guy in the room. I never, but it was always like I know my lane, and in these things I'm gonna stay focused. Everything else, somebody else should be thinking about it, doing it, or is probably better than me. So whether I hire them, find them, whatever, like I need somebody to own finance. That's not my strength. I need someone to even, when the organization grows, I'm a pretty good leader because I inspire and have vision. I was a great manager. So very quickly I would be like, I need to have someone else that's actually going to be taking the management of humans and direct reports. I'll stay in a leadership role. I'll stay in a visionary role. I love that. But I know I'm not the best at doing like weekly touch base, all hands meeting, like that's not my skill. So I would find somebody. So
Yep. Interesting. And so, and also you think like, is there part of it, not only the ego is probably a huge part of it, but then also not even knowing what to ask or when to ask. So in other words, like part of, I think my problem has been like, okay, I might get these advisors and mentors, but what do I ask them or how do I keep that relationship warm and growing? Like I've had people who could have been mentors throughout my career and I probably didn't do enough to nurture it. And I kind of let it wither. And that's something that I kind of regret. And probably, I feel like it's sort of too late, maybe in my career, maybe not, but like almost, but I regret it a little bit. And I let those things wither in ways that I'm embarrassed about. And now if I would contact them, I feel like they might just feel like, oh, like Adam needs something from me or is,
right.
and is asking for something. I don't want to provide it necessarily.
Yeah. And I do think there's a degree of, particularly with mentors, it is, I try to treat that as a formal thing. Like I have to ask someone, I would like you to be my mentor. Here's what that means to me. Here's what I would like to get from it. I don't know that I can give you anything, but I'm open to ways I might help you. So there's a degree of formality to it. And there definitely is a like relationship nurturing part of it. Same thing I would say, like my longtime mentor, nothing ever bad happened. I mean, I started, I moved abroad technically. And so it was harder to like stay in touch. And I have not done a great job of keeping that as warm as I would like. But if I would like to do that, which I do, and similar to you, I would absolutely reach out to him and officially apologize for that. It's like, hey, I woke up realizing I let an important relationship that I care deeply about, I let it sort of, fall off the radar a little bit too much. And I don't want that. I'd love to restart that. I don't have any specific ask. I'm not, and try to be just like, I apologize. It's an important relationship to me. And most people be like, I didn't think a thing about it, Adam, like, no problem, and so I think, that's life, right? Like, sometimes I would get distracted by a business. I would get distracted by my family. I pulled my girls out of school and traveled for a year. Like, I've done stuff that all of a sudden, like, my whole network would go from warm to like almost ice cold. And that's life, right? But if it's really important to you, and I think entrepreneurs should prioritize mentors and advisors, then it's just something that has to be on the short list of things that you do nurture and care about and stay in communication. And it'll go through, phases and chapters like everything. Some mentors, I had a few mentors that were early mentors that didn't, they were perfect for that chapter of my life. Then when I got to a different chapter of life, I needed and wanted different mentors. Nothing ever bad happened, but I just kind of naturally evolved to new people.
How do you go about? I mean, that sort of maybe seems silly almost to ask this, but it's a real question. How do you go about using a mentor the right way? What are the questions you ask someone? Right. Take ego out of the way. Let's pretend you were my mentor, Mac, and I'm like, okay, well, what do I ask Mac? I could like ask him about like I don't really need to ask him about what my relationship with my wife. I don't need to. Maybe it'd be good to give him an update. Hey, here's how my company's doing, and here's some of the things I'm struggling with. But like, you might not be the right person to answer all that stuff.
Yep.
Like, how does one use a mentor the right way, or what are the questions you ask and to nurture that and build a relationship and make it into a true mentee mentor relationship?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question. I mean, what I've done, whether it's the right approach or not, I mean, I think it often starts out with just relationship building. I mean, you identify someone that you think is a great potential mentor for you, and it starts out by just investing time. It can be, if nothing urgent is going on in your life, it can be small talk and just keeping them updated with, yeah, here's what's going on in my business. Here's, yeah, how things are going with my family here. And even if it's all good stuff, like, I feel great about the time I'm spending with my kids, or I don't feel great about the time I'm spending with my kids. And you're just kind of helping them understand how you view the world, what your priorities are, what's going on in your life, so that when things get out of whack, it's like, hey, I've had a great relationship with my wife for 30 years. This last year has been really tough. Here's kind of, I don't know if you ever went through that, and I do think the more open and transparent it is, the more they can truly help. And I will say this for sure. My mentor was also, he was amazing at like problem solving. And so a lot of times he didn't have the answer, which I was 100% happy because of the way he processed things. Like, I would say something and he would go, huh, that is a great question. And you could just watch it in his mind. He was like, how would I, if it were me, how would I solve that? What would I do? And then he would always say, like, let me think about that. And then usually the next day he'd call me and be like, I thought about it last night, and here's what I would consider doing. Maybe reach out to this person, maybe go, and he always had, I was like, God, great insight. Just like the way he thought, because I'm a action taker, even to my detriment. Sometimes I'm like, I thought about it, go, and he was like, let me sit on that. Let me think about it, and I was like, I need that in my life, because that's not the way I'm wired. I'm like, I get convicted and I just go. And so I think he was a great counterbalance for me. We did talk about everything over the course of decades. It was like, good stuff, bad stuff, really stuff that, made me nervous, stuff that I was going through that was really hard for me. Um, and just having a sounding board. Sometimes it's like going to a therapist. It's like, sometimes you just need to talk. And because a lot of my life was leadership of companies and growing teams and having investors, and, like, I was always optimistic and vision focused and forward focused. And I didn't want to tell someone that just invested millions of dollars and be like, hey, I can't sleep at night because I'm worried about this thing. Like, I don't want to have that conversation with them. Who do I have it with? My wife, but who else? So
Do you believe in having executive coaches?
I do. I think I probably, being critical of my background, I think I undervalued and underappreciated, or maybe just didn't understand where a coach would fit into my life. I mean, because I was an entrepreneur, mostly a tech entrepreneur in a very conservative banking town, I didn't feel like I had peers. I didn't feel like I had people I could look up to within my industry. And so I was sort of like heads down, not thinking about who could help me other than mentors and advisors, which we talked about. But paying a coach didn't even hit the radar early in my career. Now, like anything that matters to me, like that is the sign of like I'm committed. Like if I want to get fit in the gym, like hire a coach, hire a trainer. You want to get your healthier, hire a functional medicine doctor, whatever it is. Like I think that is a mistake I made, and that is an absolute you can look at someone's calendar and their spending and be like, I see their priorities. I see what they care about. And like coaching is a big part of that now.
In so okay, so that's great here. I think coaching is great too, and I have a coach myself. Let's talk a bit about like exit DNA, the stuff you're focused on today, and also like what that really means, right? So maybe to start off with, like I think one thing you've talked about a lot is the founders don't fail from lack of effort, right? They fail from lack of accountability and optionality. Like, what does that actually mean? And then how do you get yourself set up the right way as a business to run it in a successful Mac fashion?
So, yeah, Exit DNA, the way it came about was really interesting. So, I sold my last company in, I think it was October of 2018. And I was planning on literally taking the first time in my life like a hard break. I didn't have another company I was starting. I was literally like just kind of hitting the brakes. And right, right about the time I sold the company, I got asked to speak at this entrepreneurs event. And I told the organizer, I said, I am not a speaker. I don't speak at events. As a matter of fact, I don't even go to events. Like I don't attend events. Like my life is running my company and my family. Like that's
In
it.
the same way, but I stopped going to events basically completely. Not completely. I maybe go to one a week. I live in San Francisco, so there's like dozens every single day. But like, I probably go to one a week, and it's only usually if I'm speaking or hosting it. But otherwise, I just don't go anymore.
Yeah. I did like a very hard opt out for a long time. And so I just said, but ultimately he said, look, you have sold 6 companies. We have a group of hundreds of entrepreneurs, many of which are going to want to sell their companies. Just come share your journey, lessons learned, mistakes you made, things you did well. Anyway, long story short, I got up on stage, total imposter syndrome. Everybody says it's so true. I like was looking out at people that I like followed them online and I'm like, they don't even know who I am. I had no social media presence. Nobody knew who I was. And so I got up on stage and shared my story, my journey. And as I was walking off the stage, there were probably 8 or 9 entrepreneurs that literally came like running up to me, were like, I have investment bankers, I have CPAs, I have all these people around me. I have never heard anything you just shared on stage. Would you help me? And at the time, I didn't even know what they were really talking about. But one of the things I said on stage, which clearly resonated, was I have started, scaled up, and exited 6 companies, and I never sold for a financial metric. It was never an EBITDA multiple. It was never a revenue multiple. I always found someone that needed what I had so much that they paid a massive premium for what I built. And that conceptually didn't jive with what every investment banker was telling these people, what every venture capitalist, and so they were like, how do I do that? And so that was the beginning of, I basically agreed to this small group of people like, hey, I'll coach you, I'll share what I've learned. That became Exit DNA. Um, and what I, now with the benefit of hindsight, what I realized is in all of my companies, with the exception of the first one, because the internet space got like crazy hot and someone just came in and offered us life-changing money. We weren't looking to sell it. We weren't just that they just literally reached out and all of a sudden there was a bidding war and we sold the company. Every other business, I could see a bright line when we started thinking that we needed or wanted to sell the company because of something that was going on in the industry or because it was going well. Like the decisions we started making were different and it led to a great outcome, right? And so to me, it was because we have the option to sell it and we're designing it now, we're being intentional about getting Mac out of the day to day. It doesn't need to be founder dependent. Make sure it's system driven. Make sure there's intellectual property. Make sure there's something that people are like, I have to have that. That literal process was me saying, you have to have this exit mentality woven into the fabric or the DNA of your business. Like design it so people want to buy it. So they want to pay you a ton of money, and then it's just a better business. You get to choose if you sell it or not. So that's kind of been the foundation of what I teach people.
And so walk through some of those key things. Like what does a good founder do to create a sort of optionality for themselves and get themselves, I guess, sort of not being like, I guess not being the key man, making sure you have the right systems and processes in place. I mean, this is just good for me. I think it's smart ways to run a business in general, as you sort of said, like it gives you the optionality. So how do you get yourself there? Like what's some of the things, like the coaching things that people, they probably should just get you directly and work with you, but like what can they learn from this podcast too
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of, kind of key shifts. I mean, one of the hardest for people is, and you can prove it with, showing them math, showing them examples, but like entrepreneurs are so inundated with last 12 months EBITDA, last 12 months revenue, thinking that's how their business is valued. And you have to it's a paradigm shift to say that is important. It's great if you have growing revenues and you're profitable and you have EBITDA, like amazing. That's a foundation. Real value is strategic, right? And we have to find what is it in our business, hopefully more than one thing, that's really strategically valuable. Is it our customer list? Is it our brand? Is it our distribution? Is it an exclusive partnership we have? Whatever it is, I have to like help entrepreneurs start to identify where is strategic value. And so step one, identify it. Number two, how do we protect it? How does it become not just a commodity, but something unique? Is it proprietary distribution? Is it exclusive? Is it patent? Is it trademark? Do we wrap it in intellectual property? So you find it and you protect it to some degree. And then you go out to the world and say, which companies, which industries would be fundamentally better off if they had it. And
Hmm.
see, that's the other thing people get wrong is they're like, oh, the exit's all about me, my numbers, my story. I'm like, no, 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 it's not about you at all. It's about what do you unlock for a buyer. If they owned you, what would be possible for them? Those numbers are often 10 times bigger than whatever your numbers are. So I kind of like help people go through these strategic shifts of how they think about their business, how they think about value they're creating, starting to identify years before they would ever sell who in the market probably needs or wants what they have. So those are just kind of the steps, that we sort of take people through.
And once you start identifying the people in the industry who might need what they have, how do you go about like building that relationship or at all, right? I mean, like, is it about building that relationship? It sounds like once again, like based on your talking about mentors and advisors, you're really good at that stuff. But as you said, a lot of founders are not.
Yeah.
So like, how do they go build those relationships and kind of get on the radar of those people?
So one of the things that we do within ExitDNA is we build what I always call an exit blueprint. And the exit blueprint's really different for everybody because there's a couple of key decisions. Like if you did all the stuff that we recommend and you kind of get your business in a great spot and you have the option and you're ready and T's crossed and I's dotted, at some point you're going to say, now we want to go to market. We want to sell the business or we need to sell the business. Do you hire an M&A advisor or an investment banker or do you do it yourself? That's a decision. Depending on that decision, you may or may not need to reach out yourself. What I've done and what I recommend to most people is, and I'll give you a very specific example. I sold a business, I think you even said it in the intro, to NBC Sports back in 2014. I cold called the CEO of the division of NBC Sports that ultimately bought the business 2 years before we sold it.
Hmm.
And I I knew who he was. I knew of him. I didn't know him personally. I cold called, finally got through to him and just said, "Hey, I have a lot of respect for what you guys are doing. We're in the industry. We're a early stage startup building some pretty cool technology. I'd love to just pop in the office someday, meet you, no strings attached. I'm not selling anything." And he was a cool guy. He was just like, "Hey, how about next Tuesday?" And I literally booked the flight and was like, "Yeah, I'll be there Tuesday."
Yeah, smart.
And so, started out as literally a simple, but the key to that meeting and those conversations, we didn't talk about me selling the company. I wanted him to hear my vision and understand what I was trying to build so that every time I talked to him, which was usually once a quarter, I'd kind of reach out and be like, "Hey, remember we talked about X? We just launched that. Remember we talked about trying to do this? It's live now." And so he was constantly like, "Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive." So ultimately, when we decided we needed to sell the company, I picked up the phone and just called him and said, "Hey, we're going to sell the company. We already have people taking a look. I cannot imagine you guys. I think you're the best buyer, but I didn't even know if you were interested. They started due diligence the next morning. He was like, thank you for calling. And so, you can, and I had this conversation with one of our members yesterday. He's not sure he wants to sell. He's got a great business. He's got all kinds of future. And he's like, I have an opportunity to meet with the CEO of a potentially great buyer. I'm not sure, is he going to try to knock off my idea? Should I take the meeting or not? I said, if it's me, all day long, I take that meeting,
Yep, 100%.
build the relationship. And if nothing else, if you never talk to that person again, every one of their competitors, you can say, hey, I was just talking to Adam, the CEO of XYZ, and like you just dropped the fact that you're talking to their biggest competitor. And so there's so many reasons that building those relationships early, even if you never want to sell, is just a great use of a small amount of time.
What and then when does a company get to a point where it starts saying like this might be the right time to sell? Is it? I mean, there's probably a ton of different reasons, like founder burnout, revenue multiple, market changes. Like, what are the things that start driving a company to say, okay, I need to start considering an exit? But as I said, part of it is like you got to be starting this 2 years beforehand, not just with the relationships, but also just how you run the business in and of itself.
I'm glad you asked the question because I get to talking and would forget to make such a key point. That is the critical mistake that I think most people make is because most entrepreneurs, either like what they're doing or they see a lot of potential and they want to keep growing, they're not like thinking I need or want to sell now, maybe in 3 years, maybe in 5 years, maybe never. They don't know. And so the natural thing is I don't need to be thinking about this stuff now. I need to worry about it. If I want to sell in 5 years, maybe in a few years, I'll start even thinking about it, but that's too far out in the future. So critical mistake number one is they think they can wait, right? And then problem is there usually is a very specific thing that changes that drives your need or desire to exit. It could be burnout, right? Great. You're all of a sudden you're tired. Now I want to sell the business in the next 12 months. Yeah. Okay. You'll never get the same amount if you would have started earlier. It's too late. I mean, you can still sell it, never get what you should have gotten. Someone gets sick, co-founder, bad things happen, right? Your significant other, it's like, I have to sell. I mean, I don't have time. I got to take care of a kid. My kid's going, or my wife stood by me to build this business. I haven't taken much money out. My net worth is tied up in the business. I have to sell it to buy our first house. I have to pay for the kids' college. My wife is going to leave me if I don't, like the real world things that happen. And all of a sudden it goes from green to red. And it's like, now I have to sell. It's like, well, you didn't do the simple things to prepare. And now you're in a forcing function. And so I do this session in ExitDNA called the 5 factors. It's like in a perfect world, there are 5 different things that you should consider to time a great exit. It's rare that you can like nail them all, right? Of course, that's just the luxury of it'd be amazing if you could nail these, but what's going on in your industry is a huge issue, right? Good or bad. Is it consolidating? Are there buyers? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? What's going on in the macroeconomic environment? Like, are we in a recession? Are we in a bull market? Do private equity firms have a lot of money? Or people, all of these things. The biggest driver of founder-led businesses, what is the founder's personal situation? Like,
Yeah.
burnout, money, drive, whatever it is, like that will outweigh all the others. But to me, you never want to get to the point that one thing might mean you have to sell at a time where all the other 4 are negative. You're in a recession, your industry's on a decline, your team's unhappy, but you're forced to sell now. Like that's not what you want, right? So, trying to be kind of holistically looking at proactively. That's why we do the session. Like, hey, these are the 5 factors. Start thinking about them now. If you have a view, if you're a consumer products company and you're in a raging bull market for a decade, how's your company to perform in a recession? If you don't know the answer to that, I can tell you, not well.
Yeah.
So sell before the recession or decide to wait until after, no problem, but don't be blindsided by it.
Yeah. And sort of once instead of your business in a way to be prepared for all those changes and what can be coming up, what does a buyer usually look for? Like when you're a buyer, put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. What are they trying to find, right? So NBC bought you guys. A lot of people say acquisitions don't usually go all that well for the buyers, right? Yet they happen, of course, all the time and everything else. They're happening nonstop.
Yep.
What are buyers usually optimizing for? And then how do they get around the picture, especially if you're describing a business, let's say that is like industry is going bad, the founder has to exit because of personal reasons, whatever it is. How do they get then to a place where that's still an acquisition that's worthwhile for the buyer, right? It seems that if I were a buyer, it could be scary in those scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, what happens in those scenarios is what I consider the tragedy of founder-led businesses is like you're just going to sell at the bottom. I mean, you're just going to never get what you should have gotten. Like you just didn't monetize what you've created because you were forced to sell at the wrong time to the wrong people, et cetera. So it's like what do you call that? Low balling.
Yeah.
Like you're just
Lowballing
gonna,
yourself, basically.
yeah, you're just going to get the worst offers, right? And you might have to take one of them. And so buyers, there's almost always buyers for businesses. It's just, do you have the leverage or do they have the leverage? And in that situation, they have it. What most buyers are really doing, I had a session 2 days ago when we were talking about this, is like they are only interested in a deal that gives them something great. So they see a future that, again, you unlock something for them, you give them something great, and every deal looks good on paper. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. So they've already convinced themselves on paper, if they're moving forward, there's a big opportunity here. But then from that letter of intent or agreement on what a deal looks like, which is all optimistic and positive, then you go into due diligence and some other things. And what buyers are really trying to do is assess risk. What might happen? What's the worst case scenario? Adam leaves, employees leave, customers leave, industry shifts, Facebook changes the algorithm. Like, what are all these things? And that just means the deal that you just talked about is going down, down.
Right.
And it's either going down in terms of the dollars or, we still think it's great, but we're going to make this an earn out because we don't trust that that's going to automatically happen. You have to prove it now. So now it's an earn out or now it's a performance deal. So what I always tell people is, one of our rules is your deal room should be ready 3 years before you ever need to sell. Like if someone wants to start due diligence, I would smile and be like, great, jump in because I know it's already so good that it's going to blow them away. And I'm not going to watch all these problems start to happen.
Right. Because you're going to, if you don't have that stuff prepared and ready to go, they're going to be like, why aren't you ready? You're not a professionally run organization.
Yeah.
I mean, I can do this.
Skeletons, closet,
Yeah.
problems in your financials, formula, all those things hurt your value because it's yellow flags and red flags. It's risk.
And how does the founder get over the idea of sort of giving up their company to you, right? A lot of these founders you've worked with, like that's probably been their baby, right? Like this is their baby. They have a team they love, all those sorts of things. How do you get to the mindset of saying, okay, like I'm going to let someone else take this to the next level and step and walk away to some extent. And maybe maybe there's an earnout, a bit of an earnout, or they want you to stick around for a while, but even still, it's no longer your company, which I think is hard for a lot of founders to get over.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm generally dealing with people that are in one of two camps. They're either they completely agree with my philosophy, which is you need to have the option whether you want to sell or not. Like that's just the right way to do it. Like you just need to be ready. That way, no matter what happens, you can raise money if you want, you can sell if you want, you can sell some, you can keep some. Like optionality is powerful. So some people are like, I don't even know, but I want the option. Great. That's like core fundamental to me. Like everybody should do that in my opinion. And then there's the other pretty significant category of people that I work with, which are I need or I want to sell. Like maybe not in a panic, but like I'm starting to burn out or I'm starting to feel differently about the industry. I mean, AI is like an apocalypse for a lot of companies. It's like good luck after in the next year or two. If you're in a lot of these businesses, I would be thinking I need to get out. And so people, call me and say, hey, I love my business, but I'm worried now, or I think there's a problem, or, something is fundamentally going to force me to say I need or want to sell. And so I have to action that now. And that's kind of building that blueprint. So in either scenario, the one thing I would say that's kind of underlying your question is I do see from time to time, if a founder doesn't know what they're going to do post exit and it is their baby and it's their identity and they have ego attached to it, because everybody is used to going to a cocktail party and saying, oh, I'm the founder of XYZ and I'm the CEO of XYZ. Like if you are not yet comfortable with that, the chances of you self-sabotaging the deal are really high.
Yeah.
The closer you get to finally signing the agreement, you start backing up and changing terms and like the deals fall apart. And I try to help founders identify that well before sometimes they'll just have a direct conversation, say, Adam, I don't think you're ready. I don't think you're going to be happy. And I'd love to help you get there, but like, that's you. I mean, like, if you don't want to sell it, don't sell it, you know?
I see too many founders who are still many years later are still sort of identifying themselves as the former founder or the founder of this or that. And it's like, that was a long time ago. Like you kind of get over it a little bit.
Right.
There are certain things when you walk into the businesses that you work with and you audit them and sort of say, okay, these are the things I want to audit first. Or what are the key things you're looking at? Where you're like, I want to really just dig into what are you looking at? What are you auditing right off the bat?
Well, for me, I mean, the good news is I'm not a buyer. I'm not investing. I am basically, providing people a playbook of what they need to do to go from where they are to having this kind of optionality and this maximum value kind of argument. And I'm a guide and a coach and a resource for them to do that. um, I can usually help people identify where are there likely risk or problems in their business. I have, what I always call my expert network that will look at their financials. I have experts that will look at their legal docs. I have, I'll bring in people if they want them or need them and go as deep as they want, but that's not my
Hmm.
role. My role is to help them understand strategically, philosophically, what are the shifts they need to be making. And then either they can deep dive on that stuff with their own team or their own resources, or they can say, hey, Mac, anybody can help do this. And I do that. But I'd say the most common stuff for sure is founder dependency is way too high. And that's not a business, unfortunately. It's like that's, you are the business.
Yeah.
That's a real common one. And we help people go from founder dependent to, you still are important, but now you have systems and people and processes and things that you can argue the business runs with or without you. You're still important, but you're not in the critical path. Like we help people make that shift. That's important. And then the other one is, how they tell the story. I always call it the irresistible exit story, but like, how do you articulate the value in what you've created?
Yeah, like why is this thing going to be exciting and big, and what is the story about that future? And it's funny. I think obviously think through about my company a lot as we're having this conversation, and I can tell you a story about why the world is changing obviously very quickly with AI, but why every company that means they need to outsource their operations. Like no one should have this internal because why would you hire internal people in a world where they're experts who can do every little thing, including run your back office? Like there's a whole story there. Um, so one thing that's obviously important for a company to sell, if they want to try to sell, is their ability to scale themselves a little bit. So you've been able to scale all of your businesses pretty big. Are there any secrets to scaling or growing a business that you found? Like what's that unlock for that business? And by the way, like I'll add, by the way, even if you want to go sell, I assume even as in the process of you thinking of selling, you still need to be saying, I need to keep scaling the business and growing it, right? You can't sort of take your foot off the pedal just to focus on selling. You need to keep running and growing.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, and in a perfect world, you're growing right through the exit because it just, makes everything more likely to close and the numbers look better and your deal's going to get better. So scale and growing is a key part of that. Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say, I've had a lot of different businesses, different industries, different, times like, like we talked about like .com bubble, .com burst, tech, all these different timelines that are different. But one of the things that I feel like we did pretty well and I look for and try to help people think about are, distribution strategies. Like if you're a resource constrained company with a physical product or you have a service or you're an agency, it's really expensive to market your way to customers. It's not expensive to find a partnership with someone that already has those customers that carries you into them, right? And so, my company that I sold to NBC, the funny thing is, I would argue to the ends of the earth that we had the best technology in the industry. I think it was better than everybody. We were a tech company. We had a lot of great innovations. We had a lot of cool stuff. At the end of the day, they bought our business because they wanted a partnership that I had an exclusive agreement with. Like that's really where the value was. And for them, I mean, other people looked at other things, but like NBC wanted that partnership and I had signed an exclusive deal. So the only way to get it was to come through me. And so those kind of like find a way to get distribution. And if it's exclusive or if it's proprietary, it's super valuable.
Yeah, no, that's basically building a really strong moat is essentially what you're essentially what you're saying. And so that helps you with the scale, that helps you with the growth and everything else. Um, is there any sort of like operating principle that you would advise to founders to think through, like just a general piece of advice around like, hey, try to have this operating principle as you're growing and building your business? Are there certain things that they should be thinking about to build a great business?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least from my view of the world, that is a great example of one is like identify relatively early what is the strategic value that you're creating, right? Is it products? Is it technology? Is it service? Whatever it is. And those things, if you think they're really unique, really valuable, you have to put a moat around them. That could be with intellectual property. You can trademark things and patent things. You can sign exclusive agreements. But if you do something that's clever and innovative and you don't protect it, you're not going to get any value. Not only your competitors are probably going to copy it anyway, and it's going to come a commodity, or buyers are going to look at it and be like, "Well, I'm not going to pay you for that. We already have a very talented team that could go build that or go do that quickly." And so you want people to sort of look at your business and say, yeah, I'm not even, it's possible I could build it, but it would be really expensive. It would take me a long time. And I still don't even know if I would do it as well as you've done it. That's when you get paid for it. So just building, that like the buyer's lens, as we describe it, is like looking at your own business through the lens of a potential buyer is eye opening for a lot of people. It's like, wow, if I was a buyer, I would be like, yeah, there are no systems here. Oh, the founder does everything. Oh, there is no intellectual property. Everything could be copied and stolen. It's like you start asking those questions. You're like, yeah, we got to kind of get our act together here.
Yeah, look at it from the buyer's perspective and be like, okay, what's actually unique and special here? On that note, we're jumping out a little bit, but like, do you advise companies to get brokers or bankers or things like that to help them sell? Or is it more like, hey, I can go do this on my own and go talk to all my potential competitors and people who are buyers and cut out the middleman?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my experience, we did them ourselves. I had hired investment bankers for some of my early companies and got very frustrated with the way they represented us and kind of what it looked like. And so we terminated them and did it ourselves. But I think it's either an individual decision in terms of the founder's interest and role or someone in the organization being able to do that and being confident and we help, I think, people prepare for that if that's what they want to do is manage it themselves. I mean, I help people proactively reach out to prospective buyers all the time and how should they position it? What should they say? What should they not say? I mean, like we talk about that stuff a lot. Above a certain size company, it probably becomes like a no-brainer to have a good investment banker. The hard part is knowing what a good investment banker is, and we talk about that a lot.
What is a good? I mean, on the note, really quick, what is a good investment banker?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is, most investment bankers, I can be very negative and critical, but they're generally smart and pedigreed and like they look great on paper. So the challenge is you have to find investment bankers that are going to represent you and your company in a way that feels aligned. They have to actually either be creative, which is rare, or be willing to have you be involved in the process. I always say, even if you hire a banker, you can't outsource your exit. You still have a critical role. Otherwise, you find yourself sitting in the back of the room when a banker is talking about a business that you know better than anybody in the world. And so you have to have a banker that like has a low enough ego to be like, oh, you still have an important role. You have some good ideas about potential buyers that are different than the list that I was thinking of. Like that one I argue with bankers all the time is they have a list, path of least resistance, private equity and competitors. Great. What about these 5 other industries that we should be talking to?
And why don't the bankers want to hear that advice? I mean, I would imagine they're incentivized, right? I mean, I don't know that many bankers, I guess, but like I would assume they're incentivized to get great outcomes.
They are. I think it's, and there are some good ones again. So I think a lot of them, I mean, very successful, very pedigreed, very big ego. I know better than you, Adam. Let me handle this. I'm an investment banker. You've run your company, but I know how to sell companies. I do it all day, every day. And that's kind of what's going through their mind is like, I know this industry. I know this space. I know these buyers. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're generally going back to the same private equity firm, same people. And it's like, sometimes you just have to get out of the box because the best deals often are from outside the industry that you're in. People that are trying to break into your industry often pay the biggest multiples. And so if a banker is like, oh, we just need to go talk to the big players in the industry, like they're missing this whole other category. And so some of them are open. The good ones are open, like, okay, I don't know if they'll be interested or not, but we're happy to reach out to them. Great. That's all you can ask for. So
Yep. No, it's a really good point. Is there a rule around like how, I mean, I know some bankers sometimes they charge like a pretty big upfront fee and then they get a percentage as well. Do you agree with that philosophy? Don't agree with it? What are the percentages that founders who are trying to figure this out should be open to paying, if anything?
yeah, I mean, I'd say the model is basically upfront. Almost every banker will charge some kind of upfront retainer or fee to get you ready to go to market. People that go through a program like mine generally, mitigate a lot of that fee because they're like more prepared and there's less work for a banker to do. So one of the reasons that bankers actually do like us is we send them people that are prepared. But normally they'll have some sort of retainer and upfront fee. They'll have a success fee, which is 2% on the low side, 10% on the high side. Could be, anywhere in there, depending on size of company, a lot of factors. And normally they'll have a floor. So even if, like the greater of, so like if 10% isn't enough for them to get their minimum fee of $500,000 or $1 million banking fee, it might end up being like 14% because they have a floor. Generally, the retainer is credited against the total, so you're getting that back to some degree. That's the way the industry works. That's what you're going to pay if you hire a banker somewhere in there. There's some things that are negotiable, and a good banker will argue that they're going to pay for themselves because they're going to get 7% more, right? And in some cases that's absolutely true. In some cases it's definitely not true. But
Right. You just don't, and the problem is you don't know ahead of time, right? You have no idea how much. I mean, do you mind like how much does it cost for someone to be part of ExitDNA? How does that all work?
no, it's actually changed a lot over the years. This past year, it was like a year-long program. It was actually a lot more expensive. We kind of restructured everything. It's a 90-day program now. It's technically 3 payments of 4,000, so it's $12,000 total. If you pay up front, it's cheaper. I think it's 10,000 if you pay up front. The ROI is off the charts because people are adding hundreds of thousands or millions to their exit very quickly. I don't take any upside. I don't take any fees. It's literally like a program. And so it's designed to be a no-brainer for people. We have people. I had two a women-owned business, two great female founders that had a failed process, hired investment bankers, were super frustrated, and they came to me and they'd spent, I think, like 100 grand on legal fees and M&A advisor retainer, and the deal never happened. And they wanted to sell their company for 25 million. Anyway, they joined ExitDNA. They sold a little under a year later for 48 million in cash. We helped them find bankers. We helped them restructure everything. And they called me afterwards. We're like, we paid you, at the time, my program was like 18,000. He said, we paid you 18,000. We paid our banker like 1.8 million and you helped us just as much. And I was like, yeah, I need to rethink my model, but no,
You need to start charging on more.
yeah, it's designed in a way that's like really works well for me. It's very efficient and I feel good about it. So yeah, that's kind of how it's set up.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it seems like it makes a ton of sense. And obviously, with the world changing the way it is, everyone should probably be getting on your radar. Last sort of main question I'd like to ask everybody, if there's a single piece of advice that you give to every founder or that you would give to every founder to be a successful entrepreneur, what would it be? And maybe the add-on, actually sort of add on to that I always like to ask is around like, is there advice that you would have given yourself 25, 40, 30 years ago, but you would absolutely not give today that sort of just changed a lot in your career?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I mean, I do. I mean, we've obviously talked about it a lot today. I mean, but I think one of the most powerful and clarifying lenses and way to build a business is optimize it for exit. Like, I really genuinely, not even because it's self-serving, I don't care if people ever talk to me again. Like, that's what I would tell people. If you don't do that, what it basically means, and it's a tough lesson for a lot of people, is they look in the mirror and they're like, oh, I have a good business. I'm making $500,000 a year. I'm making $1 million a year as a business. It's like, you are the business. The minute you stop or get hurt or whatever, something changes, like, there is no business. There's no asset. And so if you want to be a successful entrepreneur by any of the definitions that we talked about, like, ultimately you have to have a business that is not you, and you have to be a beneficiary of it. And you have to be able to monetize it and not have all your net worth tied up in it or its potential. It's not, you can't go buy a car with potential. So,
Right.
so that's probably like an overarching thing that obviously I believe very deeply in and would recommend even at the earliest stage, entrepreneurs just start thinking that way.
Yeah, no, like that is great advice. Everyone should think through that. It's the right thing to do, and if so many people don't, but it's advice I'll give to people and make sure to take myself as well. Mac, how can people find you, get in touch if they want to learn more, all that good stuff?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a personal website. It's maclackey.com. It's MAC Lackey, Lackey. So maclackey.com, just kind of a personal site with philosophies and content and so forth. And then I do have a specific site for ExitDNA. So it's exitdna.com. I'm on most of the social media. I put a lot of free content out, at Mac Lackey, or my name is, I guess, good thing is it's relatively unique. So there aren't a lot of Mac Lackeys in the world.
Now your parents endowed you with good brains and a good name. Mac, thank you so much. Your time is so precious. So I really appreciate you spending some of it with me and my audience. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having me.